and gentlemen, special invited guests, colleagues, welcome to this official side event where we'll be discussing the Paris implementation, sustained peer learning, coordination and support in the NAP global network. We are very happy that you took the time to join us this evening. We know that you have a very busy schedule. And my name is Trevor Thompson. I'm a Grenada delegation that is participating in the COP this year. I'll be chairing this evening's event on behalf of Grenada, and we're happy to be hosting this event with the NAP Global Network. Grenada has been participating in the network since its earliest activities, and we're so glad to have the representation from our fellow developing partner and country and bilateral donors, Albania and USAID, here this evening. We'll spend the first half of the evening's event on presentations from our co-hosts, and we'll then move to a panel discussion with opportunities for questions from the floor. For opening remarks, I invite Mr. Frank Fass-Metz, the Commissioner for Climate Policy and Climate Financing, Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Mr. Fass will give opening remarks on behalf of Germany as one of the founding members of the NAP Global Network. Let us welcome him, please.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to this event this afternoon, where we can inform on progress made at the NAP Global Network. And many thanks to Grenada for co-hosting this meeting today. I would like to briefly give you some thoughts on what is our perspective on the networks within the importance of addressing adaptation needs and working on NAP implementation. We're here today 1 year after COP21, and I think it took us all by surprise, and a very welcome surprise, that we could celebrate last week the entry into force of the Paris Agreement. This shows that there's great momentum to advance on addressing mitigation challenges, but of course also adaptation challenges. And we need to move towards implementation of the Paris Agreement now. We know that even if we succeed to achieve the 2 degrees goals, or even the 1.5 degrees goal, numerous regions will suffer from consequences of climate change, and this will affect particularly the most vulnerable and poorest countries. That's why we think that adaptation is crucial, and we very much welcome the new approach within the Paris Agreement of having mitigation adaptation as key elements for the agreement. Just some highlights on the German engagement on adaptation. Currently, we have annual contributions through German public climate finance of around 1.2 billion only for adaptation. And this is a fourfold over the last 5 years. And this 1.2 billion is a little bit less than 50% of our public climate finance. So we think with this approach, we're really committed to bring adaptation at the right level. You will recall that our Chancellor has announced in 2015 that Germany will double its climate finance till 2020. So within this increase, we will also increase our support to adaptation. Last year, we launched the G7 Climate Insurance Initiative, where G7 leaders pledged to provide up to 400 million people in poor, no, sorry, up to 400 million of poor people in the most vulnerable countries with access to insurance. G7 leaders made this pledge, and we're working towards implementation. We will have events on that, so I'll skip more details on this here. Next week, we will see an initiative which Germany has been working with a group of developing countries and developed countries, as well as multilateral organizations, to give support to developing countries which want to start ambitiously on implementing the NDCs and so-called NDC partnership. It's an effort where our colleagues from the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry for Development, as well as the World Resources Institutes are joining forces together with, as I said, about 25 countries, maybe it's even more, because we see this is attracting a lot of interest. And the idea is to give support to countries to translate the NDCs into national strategies, into implementation approaches, and to bring them to also bankable investment programs. This effort intends also to provide knowledge tools for addressing sectoral issues, and we are keen that the global network on NAP implementation is part of this effort as a cornerstone of NDC implementation. Some remarks on the NAP process. I think we all agree that from the Paris agreements, we have strengthened importance on robust adaptation planning for effective adaptation. And I hope this will also increase country ownership and political will to implement NAP processes worldwide. NAP processes strives to integrate climate change adaptation into new and existing development programs within all relevant sectors, and that's why we feel it's key to look on NDC implementation within the context of the NAP processes. Just some words on the German support to NAPs. In 2012, Germany was one of the first donors to support NAP processes and has continuously developed new tools and approaches to improve formulation, financing, and implementation, as well as monitoring and evaluation. And we are very happy that through this, we have been able to support more than 20 countries in various contexts in the NAP process. In 2014 in Lima at COP20, and we were able, together with, in particular, the US, but also other developed countries, to launch the NAP Global Network with the objective to enhance adaptation processes in developing countries and coordinating bilateral support and in-country actors. And actually, this was a role model for our ideas also on the NDC partnership. So we're bringing this lesson on board also for the NDC partnership. Now we are very excited to be part of the initiative and that we were able to contribute to the first successes of this network, which from our perspective, and this goes with a great thank to the International Institute for Sustainable Development, which is hosting the Secretariat, that the work has been very well coordinated. In the last 2 years, the network has become globally renowned for facilitating peer exchange and providing expert support on adaptation planning. And it has been recognized a intellectual leader on NAP's policy and implementation. That's our reading. So I think we are really on the right track. The network now is very well positioned to support also the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And we are very happy to see interest also from further bilateral donors to join this network. I cannot say a lot about where we stand here, because there are ongoing discussions. But we think that there's opportunity to engage with further donors. Coming to closure, I would like to highlight at this side event, and many thanks for Grenada for co-hosting, that the NAP-GLO network is a great pleasure, since it's very good to see how our support contributes to the advance of NAP processes, particularly in countries like Grenada, but also in other countries. And I'm glad that Laura Dibra, the climate change focal point from Albania, has been invited to participate in the panel. Since Albania is a very good example on how we from the development side in Germany could support the NAP process. Germany is looking forward to continuous engagement with the NAP Global Network. And I close here, and I'm eager to hear from you on further details on the progress made. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Metz, for a very comprehensive overview of Germany's contribution and what will follow. And we want to thank you again. And we move into the first segment of our event with presentations from our co-hosts on the NAP Global Network and Grenada. And first presenter will be Haley Price Kelly, the coordinator of the NAP Global Network. And Haley is based at the Network Secretariat in the International Institute for Sustainable Development. And she will introduce the network activities and results in its first 2 years. Let us welcome Haley, please.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. So as Trevor said, I'm Haley Price Kelly. I'm the NAP Global Network Coordinator, and I'll just be taking the next few minutes to talk a bit about our activities, some of the results we've seen to date, and ways that people can get involved in the NAP Global Network. So just by way of background, as has already been said, the network was established in 2014 by developing countries and bilateral donors with initial financial support from Germany and the US. The network was established in recognition of the growing importance of NAP processes, the need for coordination of support for these processes, and an eagerness to learn about best practices and challenges in these processes. So the Secretariat is based at IISD. We have a steering committee consisting of both developing countries and bilateral donors who advise us on what they'd like to see the network doing. And currently, at least at last count, we had 195 participants from 53 countries around the world. So just in terms of our niche and building on what I said about why we established the network, there are sort of three main pieces of this. The first is coordination, giving the wide range of actors who need to be involved in the NAP process at the national level, as well as development partners who are supporting adaptation or providing support for climate-sensitive sectors. Learning, we know that NAP processes are country-driven. They can look different in each country. But we've seen that there's a lot of value for countries and looking at what others are doing and what could be taken on board or how common challenges are being addressed. And finally, the network has a focus on bilateral support. So if we look at adaptation-related ODA, there's actually a very considerable amount of bilateral support going to developing countries. And we want to look at how we can align this with priorities being identified in the NAP process. So whether it's called explicitly NAP support or not, we know that climate-sensitive sectors also need to be involved in implementing successful NAP processes. So how do we make sure that that support is coordinated and aligned? So in terms of our objectives, basically the network is harnessing collective knowledge of governments, practitioners, donors, and civil society. And we have 3 specific objectives. So one is facilitating sustained peer learning and exchange on challenges and opportunities associated with the NAP process. We also support national level action on NAP development and implementation. And finally, we aim to enhance bilateral support for adaptation and climate sensitive sectors through coordination and with developing countries at the table to make sure that support is aligned with their priorities. So for each of these objectives, we have discrete activities that we've been pursuing over the past couple of years or that are coming up. So I'll speak briefly to each of those and what results we've seen so far. As Trevor mentioned, later on in the panel, we have some network participants with us who will speak to specifically what results they've seen and how their participation in the network has helped them in their NAP processes or contributed to the way that they support adaptation and NAPs in developing countries. So on our objective on sustained peer learning and exchange, one element of this is our targeted topics forum events. So these are global workshops that bring together developing countries and again bilateral donor representatives to look at specific topics that they're facing in the NAP process. When we held the first targeted topics forum in 2015 in Rio de Janeiro, we heard from countries that they were really enthusiastic to hear from their peers and they'd like to come together again with them to hear how things are progressing and really continue this exchange. So we now have a cohort or peer group model. We bring these 2 groups of countries listed here together annually to look at a new topic. So far, we've looked at high-level political support and integration, financing NAP's options for implementation, and early next year, we'll be looking at monitoring and evaluation in the NAP process. So when these countries come together at a TTF, there are 3 dimensions that we want to address. So technical inputs from experts in the field on the topic that we're looking at, relational, so the sharing of experiences that we've seen our participants really value, looking at what their peers from around the world are doing. And finally, reflexive, and this one's really important, and I hope we'll hear more about it on the panel, but unpacking what lessons they've learned mean for their own country context, looking at next steps and how they can take action on the lessons that are emerging. So the other kind of discrete activity under sustained peer learning and exchange is our peer exchange program. So far we've supported peer exchanges between Albania, Grenada, and the Philippines. We have a few others that are currently being organized. And we've actually just launched an online peer exchange program. Well, it's at least you can apply online. So developing country adaptation planners, whether they're in the Ministry of Environment or in a climate sensitive sector, can request to host a peer exchange on our website, and we will share with our participants this opportunity and try to match people up. Usually this is on the kind of hosted around a key NAP related meeting taking place in the country. So for our next activity area on supporting national level action, this year we launched our Country Support Hub. So the Country Support Hub provides targeted technical support for NAP processes and their implementation. It's meant to be short-term, something that could be done within about 6 months, and complementary to broader programs of support that are already in place. So the types of things we can support, it could be having an expert on the ground supporting a specific aspect of the NAP process. It could be expert advice provided virtually. And we can also help countries to convene and facilitate what we call NAP assemblies, which are essentially national level coordination events that bring together domestic stakeholders and development partners to look at how they can coordinate their efforts and their support. So far we're providing support to Morocco and Botswana based on requests we've received. We've hosted a NAP assembly in Albania as well as a regional event in the Caribbean. And we're planning NAP assemblies in a number of countries listed here. So this is just in the next few months. Togo in December, Peru in December, and Ethiopia is likely upcoming as well. So for the final activity area, enhancing bilateral support. We're looking to enhance the understanding of bilateral donors on NAP processes and what they look like in their partner countries, as well as helping to communicate the support that they offer to raise awareness of that. And of course, there's the coordination piece as well. So examples of things we've done so far, we've recently conducted a survey of bilateral donors in collaboration with the OECD, looking at adaptation and NAP support and how they're going about that. We're developing a report on those results, and we plan to prepare profiles of the different donors who responded to help get the information out about what they're doing and how that could be leveraged for the NAP process. We also host meetings and events focused on donor coordination and joint implementation, for example, on the margins of NAP assemblies or as a part of a NAP assembly. And donors also participate in peer learning and exchange opportunities. So at TTS, we have bilateral donors present to hear from their peer donors, as well as their partner countries about what they're doing in the NAP process and how they can be involved. In terms of how to get involved, obviously signing up as a participant in the network, you'll start to receive our updates, and you can collaborate actively with us to help communicate your support. Work with your country offices to help partner countries access things like the country support hub, encourage them to apply for peer exchanges, and of course, participating in network events as well. So finally, as has already been mentioned, to complement and inform our other activities, we also develop publications and knowledge products on key issues that countries are facing in the NAP process. So yesterday we launched a new publication, a guidance note on vertical integration and national adaptation plan processes. So looking at making links between national and subnational level planning processes. We have a snapshot series that provides case examples of specific issues and how countries are dealing with them in their own contexts. And then we have a number of multimedia products, so podcasts, interactive web features, and these kind of things that help to get the lessons we're seeing emerge out to a broader audience. So just to sum up, in order to get involved in the network, as I said, the first thing is just joining online as a network participant. Let us know your expertise when you do so. Just to mention that civil society can also participate in the network. Experts, researchers, through the country support hub, the Secretariat can provide some of the support itself, but we also often draw on external experts who can be matched with country needs. Developing countries can then, as I mentioned, apply to host or participate in a peer exchange and apply for targeted technical support for the NAP process. And I've listed here again, just in summary, the ways that bilaterals can get involved beyond just signing up online. So with that, that's it for me, and I'll pass back over to my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Haley, and I'm sure that your audience have identified one or two areas that they can get involved in the NAP process. Next, I want to introduce Martina Duncan. She's the climate change focal point for Grenada, and she's working with the Grenada's Ministry of Education, Human Resource Development, and the Environment. And she will present on Grenada's process. Martina, please.
Good evening, everyone. Before I get started, I would like to thank the NAP Global Network for agreeing to co-host this event with us. And I would like to thank all of you for being here. I'd also like to thank the German government for the tremendous support that they have given us, both on the BMZ and the DMUB sides. So I'm going to start with, I'm just going to go through a little bit about Grenada, and then I'm going to go through our NAP process with you. So Grenada is located in the southeastern Caribbean. So it's a small island state, a tri-island state of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. Those are three countries or three islands that are currently mostly inhabited. It has the size of 133 meters square miles, and a population of 110,000 approximately. Okay, So we have done some studies on what, some projections on what climate change could mean for Grenada in the future. And Grenada has been identified as one of the most at-risk countries in the world. A sea level rise in the Caribbean could be from 0.17 to 0.24 meters by 2050. Changes in ocean surface temperature. There has been noticeably a reduction in distinction between the wet and dry seasons. Sometimes it's hard to tell when the rainy season really starts, and it's supposed to start in June and sometimes August. For the past couple of years, August, September, we're just starting to get rain. The annual temperatures have been increasing, and I'll show you a next slide in a while about how the temperature has increased in Grenada over the last few years. A higher risk of extreme events, and also by 2030, precipitation is likely to decrease by 53 millimeters, with reductions expected between June and August, which are some of part of our main rainfall months. So this is a graph just showing how the temperature has been increasing in Grenada over the last 30 years. And for Grenada, the hottest year would have been in 2005. Right, so for adaptation status quo in Grenada. So Grenada has a climate change unit, one person that's responsible for climate change within the Environment Division. And that is linked, or we have links with other ministries or other divisions. So the Environment Division doesn't implement, we just coordinate mainly, and our main implementing partners are Fisheries Division, Forestry, Land Use, Agriculture, Tourism, Energy, and so on. We're also the main coordinating body for the National Climate Change Committee. The Climate Change Committee has 4 working groups, including an adaptation working group. The committee is 13 members, so 13 core members, but the working groups can co-opt members as they see necessary, depending on what the group has to do at any given time. Grenada has a climate change policy, is dated and it's actually currently being updated along with the NAP. And we have plans for selected sectors or areas exist already, and I'll go into that a little bit later, are currently developed. Many activities or projects that have been taking place in the last 2 decades for adaptation in Grenada. We have things like the PPCR, several funding projects from the BMUB, DFID, and so on. And we have already appointed a National Designated Authority for the NDA, and readiness activity is on the way. As I said, Grenada doesn't start from scratch with regard to adaptation. We have a lot of documents that doesn't necessarily say adaptation, but it's that the different sectors have developed over the past couple of years that we can use for adaptation. So for the NAP process, it is being implemented under the project called the Integrated Climate Change Adaptation Strategies Project. That goes from 2012 to January 2019. It is financed by the German Federal Ministry for the Environment under its International Climate Initiative, and is implemented jointly by the government of Grenada, the GIZ, and the UNDP. The NAP is under the GIZ component of the ICAS project. Actually, this Grad Apps logo was also developed under that project. It's one of our awareness packages that came out of that project. So for Grenada, the objectives of the NAP was to reduce vulnerability to climate change and to integrate or mainstream climate change into new and existing development planning processes within all relevant sectors and across all levels, community level, national level, the political level. So Grenada's NAP process is led by the Environment Division, as indicated earlier. The process started in February 2015 with a kickoff workshop. We call a SNAP workshop, where we looked at different priorities, what the needs are, and we assessed the needs and what we have already, what we would need going forward. In May, from that, we used information from the workshop to try to get the political buy-in. So it was sent to the cabinet, and in May 2015, the cabinet approved and gave us the mandate to go forward with the NAP process. in November 2015, we actually started the revision of the climate change policy and to ensure alignment with the NAP process. And in December 2015, we started with the sectoral workshops to identify priority activities for each climate relevant sector. The key sectors for the NAP, some of the key sectors that we look at for the NAP are tourism, agriculture, fishery sector, water, coastal zone, infrastructure, and so on. I'll get into that a little bit later. And in October 2016, we had a joint stakeholder workshop. So the stakeholder workshops ran from December 2015 to September 2016. And these were all sectoral, sector specific. We also had bilaterals if the sector wasn't big enough, depending on, so like for instance, the meteorology office, it was a bilateral we had with them. And in October 2016, we had the actual launch. So we had a first draft of the NAP document that we brought all stakeholders together, where you can look at especially their cross-sectoral activities and so on. So they were able to give their feedback on where we may need to make changes, where we may have missed linkages and so on. And we hope to finalize the NAP document by the end of 2016. So since 2015, the NAP development has gone through a very broad stakeholder process. We have involved over 160 Grenadians in the process so far, and the process was guided by the 2012 UNFCCC technical guidelines for the National Adaptation Plan process. So we have 5 groups of stakeholders for the NAP process in Grenada. We have the Cabinet, the National Climate Change Committee, the Environment Division. We have different ministries, departments, and statutory bodies. And then we had the civil society, private sector, and the general public. This table shows the different activities that each stakeholder group was responsible for. So we got the mandate from the Cabinet at the highest level, and at the end, they would actually endorse the NAP. They have to endorse the NAP at the end of it. The National Climate Change Committee provided the strategic direction for the entire NAP process, from the stakeholders, to the drafting of the NAP, to the vision and objectives and so on. An Environment Division, which is coordinating within the different stakeholders. We launched the NAP process, reach out to the stakeholders, consolidation and research with the different stakeholders, the documents and so on that we needed to go through for the NAP process. And of course, the preparation of the draft of the NAP and then the finalization. And the last 2 groups of stakeholders, the ministries and the civil society and so on, they were engaged in the sectoral and bilateral workshops and then the national consultation of the NAP. And a final feedback. So, in the initiation and launch of the NAP process, including the briefing state and non-state stakeholders about the risk from a variable and changing climate. So we were able to update, explain to the stakeholders what the risks are for climate change, what we can expect, what the projections are for climate change, so that then they can be more informed on what the needs are. Because they're the ones that are actually implementing. So we have to make sure we engage the stakeholders throughout the entire process. We did an extensive review of existing documentation that we thought were most relevant for the NAP, or the different adaptation actions that were already, different adaptation documents that were already available in Grenada, although they were not classified as adaptation per se. And then we had the final national stakeholder consultation. So there are 2 key documents that we align the NAP with. The Growth and Poverty Reduction Strategy, 2014 to 2018, where we have building resilience, developing competitiveness with equity, reducing vulnerability, and strengthening governance and security. And the National Strategic Development Plan 2030 is a plan that's being developed by Grenada for a 15-year national development plan. We had to make sure that climate change is one of the pillars of that plan. So we had a lot of consultation with the committee on that. And we did get the political buy-in and the buy-in from the committee, the lawyers and so on, an agreement that climate change is relevant, it is important for us, it is a priority for Grenada. So we were able to get it into that plan as one of the key pillars for the NAP process, for national development. So we have 7 principles for the NAP. Grenadian ownership. It has to be owned. So that's why we needed to have that wide stakeholder participation. The NAP would be an umbrella document. It's not going to be, it's an umbrella document where you can use what we already have and what we're going to be developing in the future. So it's just a strategic document for adaptation for Grenada. It's specific to recognize human and financial capacity constraints, which we have a lot of, and adopt an approach that works within these circumstances. So we have to make sure that it could work for us. You also have to use the NAP, recognize the NAP as an instrument to mobilize financial resources. That's one of the things that we push to get that political buy-in for the NAP process. Because if I get to let the politicians know why you're using so many resources to develop this document, why is it important for Grenada? Of course, mainstreaming, it has to be overarching. You can integrate it not only into the sectors, but integrate the sectors into it. We also use a precautionary principle. Uncertainty should not be used as a reason to not take action. We can't wait until we know what could happen, or we're not responding to activity. We're being proactive in our planning, and we have to remain flexible. The NAP document is 5 years, and we plan to update it. We also have a monitoring and evaluation plan with the NAP document. So the NAP document is a 5-year plan from 2017 to 2021 with different multi-sectoral programs of action. It's an umbrella document mainly based on prioritized climate change adaptation activities taken from already existing sectoral and local area plans. And it is a living document, so that's part of the flexibility of it. So you can always update it as necessary, as new information comes in. That's why the review period is such a short time. It's 5 years, and we're getting new data, new scientific data all the time. So we need to be able to update as we get that information. And there's still a lot of vulnerability studies, and so that we need to detail vulnerabilities. We have done short vulnerability studies on all of the sectors, but we need to get those detailed studies done. So the vision of the NAP is a resilient nation that continuously adapts to climate change by reducing the vulnerability through comprehensive adaptation strategies. The NAP has 12 program of actions and 14 corresponding goals. 2 of the program of actions have 2 goals, and there are 20 indicators. For us, the NAP, for implementation of the NAP, is estimated to be between 150 to 200 million US dollars. There are a couple of the program of action that we have not actually found, haven't actually identified exactly how much it costs. That's why the range is so large, but it would fit within that range for implementation of the NAP. So the NAP, the content of the NAP, there are 7 areas, 7 main areas of the NAP. There's a reference framework with recognition of existing studies, the overarching goals and sectoral goals, the mainstreaming priorities and approaches, and we had a development of the 14 priority actions of strategic importance. Then we also have the area on the strategies and measures to strengthen climate finance. So you have a dedicated section on finance, or dedicated financial plan for the NAP implementation. We have mechanisms for capacity building, outreach, and involvement. We have to make sure that that everyone knows about the NAP, they know what their responsibilities are, that people are engaged, or people know more about climate change. You have to change lifestyles. So we have all of that included in the NAP also. And of course, we have a timeline and revision periods for the NAP. So the objectives of the NAP are in line with the UNFCCC guidelines. It's also in support of CARICOM's climate change implementation plan, 2011 to 2021. We had to make sure that it was in line with the regional overarching plan, and also in line with the Grenada's climate change policy, as well as the nationally determined contributions, where we have highlighted the following objectives: enhancing institutional framework, building coastal resilience, improve water resource management, and building the resilience of communities. Which is just a pretty box showing the 14 goals of the NAP. So they include things like food security, water resources management, ecosystem-based adaptation, the climate risk or climate proofing of all government projects, and not just the investors that come in that do their projects. The financial parts, the diseases also, the climate-sensitive disease surveillance and control. We also have infrastructure and so on. So now I'm going to go a little bit detail on the program of actions and the different program of actions and their goals. So the first program of action we have is institutional arrangements. And the goal for that is the institutional structure to support coordination, mainstreaming, and implementation of climate change adaptation action is strengthened. I'm not going to go through all of these. It's going to take a while. I'm just going to run through it quickly. The slides will be available online, and so you can read further if you need more information. The second program of action is mainstreaming, and we have water availability, food security, ecosystem resilience, integrated coastal zone management, resilient infrastructure, and sustainable land management, disaster risk reduction and disease prevention. A lot of people ask us why we put disaster risk reduction and disease prevention together. For us, the disease, when we have these disease outbreaks, it really is almost like a disaster for us. For instance, we had like the Zika outbreak, and it really impacted our economy because people couldn't go to work. There are a lot of people that were out. You go to a bank and you couldn't find anybody to serve you and there would be a sign saying, sorry, we can't assist, we can't facilitate as we would normally like because all our staff is out sick. A lot of businesses had to close down for days on end because all of the staff was sick and so on. So we end up class the two of them together. We also have the climate and sea level rise data and projections. The data is very important for us, as you know, and sustained public education and participation. We also have climate financing and monitoring and evaluation. Now, through all of this, we got some key lessons that we would like to share with you. For when you do your own NAPs or you're assisting with NAPs or assisting countries with their NAPs and so on, whether you're providing support financially, then you know that some of these are the things that you may expect depending on the structure. For us, the NAP, we realize you need to keep it lean and you need to prioritize. We took the sectoral approach, where we have these sectoral plans. It was very time consuming. It took a long time for us to get here. So you need to be able to identify whether you have the capacity to be able to do that approach. Our approach is not the only approach that there is. The NAP Global Network has several in the documents, and you will see that there are several different options that you can choose to do your NAP. We also identify that you have to be realistic and manage a whole time frame for the NAP. It can't be too long, it can't be too short. The activities has to be able to, you have to make sure that the activities in the NAP can be implemented within the time frame that you give the NAP. Of course, not all the time you would get it right, but at least the majority of it would be right. You need to own it. So that's part of where you have mainstreaming. So one division or one ministry isn't the only one that's going to be responsible for NAP implementation. You have to give others persons responsibility. Give the different ministries, the forestry, you give the tourism authority, you give the fishers, and so on. They all have to do their part. One person or two persons or one division alone cannot do the implementation. We also identified you need to link the NAP to planning. It's the best way to get it going and get it moving for implementation is to link it with planning. The national planning, whether it's national planning, whether it's the ministry's corporate plan, the annual corporate plan, and so on. You need to be able to you need to link it with that. You need to get either you put the activities within the, that's what we did for the climate change smart agriculture. We actually went into the Ministry of Agriculture. We sat down with the different relevant officers and actually tried to fit in different activities into their work plan. And that's a really good cost saving mechanism. When you actually have it on the people's work plan, it's already there, especially it's not activity that you have to get a lot of extra resources for. The resource mobilization needs to be a key pillar of the NAP. Many of the activities you would need to get additional financing, so you need to be able to know how much this would cost, and you need to be able to put aside the resources that you can access the resources for implementation of the NAP. Also, you have to create political incentives for mainstreaming. As I said earlier, the political will, it wasn't hard to get political will because we explained, we gave the politicians the data, we showed them all the different graphs, what could happen, what the projections are, why it is important for us to adapt to climate change. And you need to take your time and don't overburden people. The process takes a long time. It took a long time because we had to take our time with the stakeholders. There were a lot of different things happening at the same time, and you can't rush the process. People need to be able to need the time to be able to think about what they already have and so on. Because we find cases where somebody would work on a document 2 years ago, and the first time you meet them, they don't exactly remember that they did this activity, and then later on, after going through more information, they realize, but we have this already. So we have to think about things like that, where you need to give people the time that they can get up to speed on what's really happening around them. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martina. I know it was a lot of information. Well, she said the slides would be available to you. And Grenada is one of the few countries in the Caribbean that have completed a NAP, the entire process. So that's something that I would say we're proud of. And I want to thank the presenters for this, for their presentation in this section. And as mentioned before, we have a second half of the event where we move into a panel discussion to hear a bit more about the results of the NAP, of the network's first year of activities from the prospective participants. And I want to turn this section over to Haley. She will moderate this segment and introduce our panelists. Haley, over to you.
Thank you. All right, so just to introduce the panelists that you haven't heard from, Martina will also be joining us for the panel discussion, but we also have John Furlow from USAID Washington office. He's also on the network steering committee and management team. And we also have Laureta Dibra, who is Albania's climate change focal point and has also been involved in the network for the past 2 years. So thank you for coming and for joining us. The way we're going to do this is I'll put a couple of context setting questions to our two panelists who haven't spoken yet so that you get a sense of who they are and what they're doing. And then we'll intersperse the questions that I have for the panel with some questions from the floor. So if you have questions for Martina or myself, we'll take a minute for some of those after we go to John and Laureta. So I'll start with you, John, as our bilateral representative. So we wondered if you could just give us a bit of background on how your participation in the network has informed the way that USAID is supporting NAPs or adaptation with its partner countries.
Thank you, Haley, and thanks to the network and to Grenada for letting me join you. And thanks for coming tonight. It's a bit late. So the network has been very useful to USAID in our bilateral programs in a couple of ways. As Martina mentioned, and as Haley mentioned, it's a great way for us to learn and communicate it sort of through headquarters and back out to our various partner countries through our missions. We're able to, for example, I learned a lot. I was able to be involved in some of the Grenada work. I was able to take lessons from Jamaica, where I was involved in developing their climate policy. I was able to share some of those lessons with Grenada, but I also learned about some of the capacity assessment work that Grenada was doing with GIZ, and then take that back out to the countries where I've worked. Martina mentioned the different models that countries are taking, and as our missions write in, our AID missions write in to us in Washington and say, our country, such and such a country is working on their NAP, they're not sure how they should structure it. Thanks to the network, I'm able to look across a number of different countries that I'm not working in directly, but learn from the models that they've put forward, whether it's a very centrally managed process, such as in the Philippines, where they have a very strong climate change office, climate change office, or a very much a bottom-up approach as Grenada has taken, or somewhere in between. And so we can offer options, as Martina said. Another thing that's been very helpful for us is we tend to program on 3 to 5 year cycles. And so as the NAP process was picking up speed here at the negotiations, a lot of our country offices had programmed their money in adaptation, but not necessarily in support of the NAP. And so working with the network and with the partners in the network, we're able to help our missions see how the work they're doing in a specific component of agriculture or in land use management or something else, how they can connect that into the NAP without supporting the NAP directly. And so I think, as Martina said, the NAP is going to, implementation of NAPs is going to involve a number of sectors, a number of different actors coming together and working together toward a bigger whole. And being a part of the network has helped us communicate with our field offices about how the programs they may already have in place can fit into that bigger whole. And I'll say one last thing, if I may, and that is that we've also been able to, aid works in about 100 countries. We have climate adaptation work going on in about 25. But again, through the network, we've been able to connect some of our non-climate programs to the NAP process. And I think we were able to do that in Albania by connecting some of our programs and our staff working in Albania with the NAP process that Laureta and GIZ were working on. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. So Laureta, I'll come to you now before we open to the floor for a few questions. And if you could just briefly talk to us about what the key elements of Albania's NAP process have been to date.
Okay, thank you, Hailey. First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to GIZ and the NAP Global Network for accompanying us in all the NAP process over the last 2 years. It was a very good experience working with you in elaborating the NAP document, as well as setting in the place process for integration, the adaptation in our national planning activities. In fact, the key elements of the NAP process in Albania, the most important one has been understanding that the NAP process, the NAP is a process in itself. It's not just developing a single document, but it is a long-lasting activity with the involvement of a number of sectors and different levels. In this regard, we established the Interministerial Working Group on Climate Change, and since February 2015, we have organized 7 meetings with this working group with involvement of different institutions and line ministries. And finally, in June 2016, we finalized the NAP document and organized the NAP Assembly in our country with the support of NAP Global Network, where we launched the NAP document. This document has identified the risks in the country, especially, particularly for Albania, risk is coming from flooding, which impacts different sectors such as tourism, agriculture, energy, water, health. And in this, we build, let's say, on the certain rich knowledge and information data that was provided through the support of the UNDP in the country, through the national communications that has been developed in years. Actually, the final one was the 3rd national communications. And based on this, we have identified some priority areas, and these documents provides the implementation framework for these priority areas. And I would like to say that this is not just a mere description of certain activities, but it is also an implementation framework for integration of adaptation in other sectors in our country. On the other hand, I would like to say that we are still working with financing strategy, which has the aim to identify the possibilities for financing the NAP document through NAP process, let's say through identifying domestic, public and national resources, as well as international resources. This is where we are actually.
Great, thank you. So are there any questions from the floor that people have, whether for Martina based on her presentation or the first couple responses? My colleague here has a mic, so she'll come to you.
Is it working? Yeah. I'm Joseph Heider from KfW Development Bank, the German Development Bank. I have a question to Martina related to the Grenadian work, really a wonderful work on your NAP process. I'm impressed, really. What I didn't quite understand, you mentioned the NDC only once, and you said you want to have it in line with your NDC, your NAP process in line with the NDC. Could you briefly elaborate on how the interlinkage is between the NAP process and the NDC? How is it reflected in your NDC and vice versa?
So I'll take one more maybe, and then in the next round, we'll come to you if that's okay. So please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Peter Witt from CARE Denmark in the Southern Voices program. I have a question to Grenada and Albania on when you have such a wide array of issues, what were the main sort of dilemmas you faced in terms of taking the difficult decisions in prioritizing? Because you cannot fund everything. Your point was that you need to be lean and you need to focus. So then you would face some dilemmas. So if you could share some of those, that's one question. And another one, how did the stakeholder engagement in civil society add value to the process? Did this stakeholder engagement help you make those difficult choices? I'm asking because I'm working myself in a project supporting civil society networks who engage in adaptation policies at national level. And one of our findings are normally that NAP, that adaptation policies tend to prioritize hardware and neglect investment in people. So this balance is a key issue. So I'm also curious to learn how does that sort of translate into your NAP documents.
Okay, thank you. So Martina, do you want to go first on, I guess, both of the questions that are the...
Okay, for the question on the NAP process and linkage with NDC, Grenada didn't have a commitment on adaptation in NDC. We had a report on adaptation, and it did mention there was 4 key priorities: the coastal zone management, water resource management, and mainstreaming and EBA and so on. So we were able to use those principles because they were already identified through the NDC process to help us with identifying the priorities for the NAP. Is that okay? All right, good. In terms of the prioritization of the dilemmas and prioritization of the issues for the NAP, there actually weren't really many challenges with that. I mean, the persons that decided were the ones that actually work in the sectors. They know exactly what they need and they prioritize themselves. And we didn't tell them what to choose. They chose based on what they thought were priorities. So it was very stakeholder driven in that sense, that we were not dictating to them that this is what you need to do. We're giving them all the options, and they, based on their expert experience, would tell us that these should be the priorities for that. For the civil society, well, Grenada had civil society representative on the National Climate Change Committee. We also have the civil society, actually some of our main implementers. So they work a lot in implementing projects across Grenada with the communities at the national level also. So they're very knowledgeable on the issues of climate change, what the needs of the country are, and so on. So they were able to give their input in the decision making also from that aspect, because sometimes at the end of the day, they are the ones that we still have to go back to for the implementation. So we had to involve them throughout the process, and they were very willing, they were knowledgeable, they were able to give good feedback and make good recommendations for the process.
Thank you. So Laureta, then to you as well on the main challenges and how did stakeholder engagement help with prioritization?
Also, in Albanian case, prioritization of the action has been a challenge. We have used all the information in the country, all the studies made from UNDP, from World Bank, and other organizations regarding to the risks and impacts of this risk in our sectors. Some of these studies have also identified certain measures to be addressed in the country to address the climate change adaptation. We have organized 7 meetings with the Interministerial Working Group, and we have started with the stock-taking process and using some tools with the assistance of GIZ in a way to come with certain numbers of actions. And let's say based in these modules and the tools that we have used, step by step we have, let's say, prioritized the actions and make some linkage also with the priorities identified in their strategic documents. For example, the strategy of water resources management, strategy of agriculture. If the priorities identified in the NAP make linkage with their documents, because it could help also for their financial and having support also from the Ministry of Finance in budgeting these activities for the future and making them workable. Now, for the stakeholders' involvement during the NAP process, in fact, we have extended the participations, just not only including the people from the line ministries, but also from different institutions and researchers, academia, and some NGOs which work related to the climate change. We, in our country, in fact, we do not have too much NGOs working for climate change. Mostly are related to environmental, but those that has been, let's say, focus in this area has been frequently invited, and we have always considered their comments and have reflected in the document.
Thank you. So a few more questions from this side for the panelists. I'll go to Laureta first. So what are some of the key lessons that you've taken away through your participation in the network?
In fact, for us, participation in this NAP Global Network activities, as called the Targeted Topics Forums, has been a very good experience. Experience has been because we have shared the experience with our countries that participated in the NAP Global Network, and also the expert advice has helped us in our NAP process. One of the most important lessons has been regarding to the importance of the support in the high level, political high level. And we have seen it as a very important that could support us also in adoption of the NAP document. When we launched the NAP document, in this activity participated the Minister of Environment, and this attracted attention also of the national media, and this let's say helped also for us to give the relevant importance also the other stakeholders that participated in the process. Another lessons learned from this participating in this topic has been also the importance of involvement of the institutions that participate, that are involved in the planning budget in the country, such as the Ministry of Finance. And during the preparation of financing strategy, we involved the Ministry of Finance, and this was of great importance because we are now thinking how to integrate these activities in the next medium-term budget, the next steps, the division, let's say starting from one or two activities and step by step for the 3 years subsequently.
Thank you. So we'll come back in a minute to questions from the floor, but I want to go back to John first. So you've spoken a bit about how the network, participation in the network has shaped USAID support. So building on that, from your perspective, why should other bilateral donors consider joining the network?
Well, that's great. We've learned it's been really gratifying working particularly with GIZ. We've done a little bit of tried to do a little coordination with DFID and Japan, but we've worked very closely with GIZ, and it's enabled us to look at where our strengths lie and where theirs lie. And so in Cambodia, our mission was hearing that that Cambodia needed support for finance readiness. We did not have a program at USAID, and so we were able to fund GIZ to implement for us. And I think that kind of dealing with adaptation is going to be a huge task for all of us. And I think there's more than enough work to go around among the donors, among the development agencies. And so the closer connections with the bilateral donors in particular is helpful because we can look at who's being asked to do what in a country, where we have strengths, where do we have agricultural programs or coastal management programs, where does another donor have similar programs, where can we either make sure we're not overlapping geographically, where can we recommend to a country that, look, if you want this, you'd be better off taking that request to Germany or to the UK or whomever. We're also finding benefits through the increased connections that we're having with multilaterals. And so we're working a bit with the Global Support Program that UNDP and UNEP run. To the question about from over here, investments in hardware versus investments in soft skills. Some of the work we've done in Jamaica and that I hope we will continue doing elsewhere is we're able to provide a small amount of funding for training for the weather service in Jamaica to complement World Bank and IDB investments in equipment for the Met Service, in monitoring stations. So the increased awareness of what all of us is doing is really helping us think about where we can come in and add value. And if we don't have the funds to do it in a huge way, we can still add value with soft skills or with connecting the dots.
Thank you. So one for Martina now before we go back to the floor. And I was wondering if you could tell us about an action Grenada has taken in its SNAP process based on something that you learned through the network.
So Grenada has been participating in the network since the early days. Actually, one of the first things that we identified when we got for the first TTF, it was on finance. And when we got an invitation, we sent someone from the Ministry of Finance to that meeting. And when they came back, the representative said, I felt like a fish out of water. So then we realized that part of our mainstreaming efforts must include the Ministry of Finance. And not just the budget division also, but the entire ministry, the planning division, the economic division, the budget, and so on. So we were able to, and it's also part of our mainstreaming efforts. So we had to, we did a lot more training, we did a lot more engagement with the Ministry of Finance. Also, another thing that we noticed was that we were missing from our participation in Albania, we were missing a key stakeholder group, the private sector. We hadn't previously engaged them very much in the adaptation process, but then we realized that it was important because they're also affected and they can also do their part in, for instance, the tourism sector. They can do a lot of work in adaptation, and we have engaged them from that going forward.
Thank you. So I know this gentleman's been waiting patiently, so we'll go to a question here and then we'll come to this side.
To follow up, I thought I'd have two questions. One for you about vertical integration, which I think is great. And Hefas Metz, if I might ask for an opinion from you, which I think follows up this idea of the soft and hard support for adaptation and the phrase around bankable projects. So for vertical integration, first I should say who I am. My name is Gerald Miles. I work with RARE. We do adaptation in communities around fisheries and coastal habitat and in watersheds. So vertical integration, have you found, just to give people a snapshot of your report, have you found that there is a generic or a one-size-fits-all process that connects local governments or communities back into a national process? Or are you thinking more about top-down plans connecting to, just to give us some perspective of what you've found briefly? And the question for you, Hefas Metz, was on the point about investing in adaptation. Bankable projects are perhaps easier to conceptualize from a mitigation perspective, but from an adaptation perspective, as you think about linking what's coming out of the NAPs to investment in bankable projects, how are you seeing that the component that relates to capacity building, or when you're adopting even hardware in terms of adaptation, how do you see that being incorporated? We're finding that a lot of investment needs to go into adoption of new process or new approaches to actually change the behavior of individuals or institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. So there is a question here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy I'm here to be part of listening to the global NAP, the NAP Global Network. My name is Wale Adeleke. I work with the West African Biodiversity and Climate Change Program, which is supported by the USAID West African Mission. Part of that program include coastal resilience for climate change. And one of the things that we are planning to work on is assist some of the countries in West Africa in the development of their national adaptation plans. I'm particularly happy listening to the experience from Grenada. One thing that came out very strongly in the lessons learned by Grenada is that NAP is an instrument to mobilize financial resources. When the Secretariat of NAP Global Network was given the ideas, initial presentation that you made, there are 53 participating countries. I noticed there are some Africans involved. There was Benin, there was Tanzania, some other Madagascar. You are talking about creating hubs, country support hubs. Are these hubs based on regions, or are you emphasizing basing them on regions so that out of the 53 participating countries, I noticed that about 8 or 10 countries that you have really worked with. You started in 2014, definitely, so you wouldn't have been able to assist all the 53 countries. Are you planning on setting up regional hubs so that each of the countries, for example, Benin, can assist other countries? Or is the Secretariat thinking of doing this with all the 53 countries? This is because it's going to be very helpful for us to benefit from the experience of other countries so that we can learn, just like I'm learning from what happened in Grenada. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so on the first question about vertical integration and whether there's a one-size-fits-all model for doing this, I think like most things in the NAP process, there is not, although that would be easier. What we've developed is guidance that's complementary to the technical guidelines, which are similarly not meant to be prescriptive, but to give kind of key considerations that you should think about. at different stages in the NAP process to make sure that you're doing something that makes sense in your country context and that will also get to the ultimate objectives of the NAP process. So reducing vulnerability and integration. So we have seen different models. Morocco is one of the case studies in the guidebook. We look at different dimensions of vertical integration. In that case, we were looking at monitoring and evaluation in the NAP process. And in the case of Morocco, they've really started at the subnational level, developing their M&E systems. And they're now looking at how that could be fed up to a national level system, which is obviously a topic of interest in the NAP process. There are other examples in Colombia, for example, where at the national level, they're supporting the creation of regional nodes and institutional arrangements to support vertical integration in the NAP process. So unfortunately, there's not a one-size-fits-all, but I think looking at case studies, you can kind of pull out pieces that would make sense for different contexts. The next question was for Mr. Fass-Metz.
Thank you very much. On the question of, if I understood correctly, the idea of bankable projects in the context of capacity building. And as I made reference to the NDC partnership, I pointed to the idea that, of course, part of the work should be to bring also individual programs and projects to the stage of being bankable. I meant that in the sense of the individual project having been analyzed in a way that we are certain that it is feasible to implement, not in the sense that it must comply with requirements on economic rates of return or something like that, which usually you associate with the term bankable. Of course, and I fully agree, for adaptation, you will need technical assistance, capacity building, and these are crucial for transformation. The term bankable in the sense of internal rates of return, something like that, does not apply in this context, but rather the idea to have a clear picture on what is needed, how to go there, and what would be the objectives, how to measure that technical assistance and capacity building really has been successful. I will be abusive and ask myself questions to the panelists. And I hope you will forgive me for that at the time we have. I've been curiously listening and very interesting presentations of Martina on the process in Grenada, as well as the explanations from Laureta from the Albanian NAP process. And one dimension intrigued me because very little was said about. Martina said something on the experience, how to engage the private sector. So my question would be, what is your lesson learned on how to engage the private sector, which you would want to share through the NAP Global Network as an element to take on board also for other countries who want to go to NAP processes? As we know, and tourism in Grenada certainly is a case for that, climate change will not stop with the public sector, but we will need to look on how the private sector brings on board the needs for adaptation. My second question relates to Martina as well. I noticed that Grenada has been a very long engagement on looking on how to address adaptation needs. And one experience was the pilot program Climate Resilient, where Grenada is engaged. Now Grenada has been successful in developing its national adaptation plan. What would be the lessons from your perspective in undergoing these different exercises you would want to share through the NAP Global Network? Thank you.
Thank you. So to respond to the first question about the country support hub, so I should clarify that's one thing. The country support hub is based at the NAP Global Network. In terms of responding to regional requests or providing regional support, mostly we've been responding to country level requests. And there have been specific instances where we've worked at the regional level. So in the Caribbean, for example, we did see an appetite for that. So we had this regional Caribbean NAP assembly. I think we can be open to that in context where it makes sense. You'll see if you access the country support hub, you just kind of have to provide a justification for how this relates to the NAP process and why it makes sense. I think there are also other support programs with focused at the regional level as well. So many of the multilateral programs focus on the regional level and sharing within regions. And in the network, we've really focused on these global peer groups. And we see a lot of interest from people from completely different geographies and parts of the world who are able to take away lessons, Albania and Grenada being two of them. But I'd be happy to speak with you more after the event as well about that. So now to Martina with the other questions about how to engage the private sector and how you might share that through the network.
Okay, well, first of all, Grenada is a very small country and almost everybody knows everybody. So it's not difficult to get in touch with people unless they want to try to avoid you. But what we did is that we reached out to some of the sectors or the business community that we thought were most relevant for climate change adaptation. For instance, as I said, the tourism sector, there's a Grenada Hotel and Tourism Association. Reach out to them, and there are actually some hotels that are trying to get Green Globe certified and so on. And some of them actually started, they have saltwater desalination plants. They already changed their faucets to low water use and so on. So there actually are hotels that already started their own process from before, and it was easy to get them now to use them to build that awareness with their peers in the tourism within the sector. Also, we also look at some of the companies that actually bring in. We're actually doing that now, bringing in some of the appliances, the equipment that you would use, so to start bringing in more climate smart technology, and it's not energy efficient, but the more like the water efficient technologies and so on. So so we're engaging some of them with that now, and it's because it's the challenge with that is the market. They don't think that they might get the market or the interest from the market, and there aren't really any incentives because those sometimes it's more expensive. So you have to get the interest from the people, the general public, really, for they will have to be willing to engage on that level. So the biggest challenge with that, in getting the private sector to bring those technologies, is the pricing. So we have to look at the policies that involve in terms of getting like tax concessions on bringing in those up, as opposed to bringing in the regular faucets and the regular equipment that we use that are not as efficient as the others. And the other question on how to address adaptation needs, and what would be the lesson learned?
How to share it through the network.
Yes, how to share it through the network. Well, as you said, there's a lot of adaptation work being done in Grenada. The PBCR project was a very broad project, a lot of infrastructure work and response and recovery, enhancing that sector for the response and recovery for disasters. And of course, the NAP, there's a lot of different studies. We have the IISD project, which is doing looking at the water sector, the coastal zone, also as well as the community engagement, the community level participation, where we have a community fund. I think one of the lessons that I learned from that is to maintain that inclusivity. You have to try to include as many people. So do a very good stakeholder mapping and try to include as many of those stakeholders as possible. I mean, not all the time they may not always be interested, but you have to try and get that interest in some way or another. Another thing is that you have to be patient. Everyone has a lot of other things going on, and for you, climate change is your priority, but might not be somebody else's priority. So you have to be patient with the people to get that feedback, to get that buy-in, to get that participation from them. Instead of sharing it with the NAP Global Network, well, they're very receptive to information, and they're always willing. They're very easy. It's very, very easy to work with the NAP Global Global Network. They're excellent at communication. You email them and you get a response within a couple hours, whether if it's Haley or Christian or whoever else is in the network, so it's very easy to get them to give you a feedback for you. So if you have something to share, I think it's simply just letting them know that we have this, we want to share it, we want to, we have interest in sharing it with the network, the rest of the network or the rest of the world, and they would assist with putting it together. You give them information, they would put it together, do the design of the fact sheet, or what is a fact sheet or video or whatever, and they would assist with distributing that throughout the network, whether it's by emails or online and so on.
Thank you very much. So thank you all for active participation in questions, and thank you to the panelists. I'm conscious that it's late and then there should be refreshments waiting, so I'm going to pass to Trevor to make a few closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Haley, and thanks to the panel. I think it was a very, very interactive session. I wish it could have been at an earlier time when we could have had some more time to discuss and to get some more questions from the floor, because I feel that there is more people who wants to ask some more questions. However, I also want to thank you, the guests, for taking the time to be here. I want to say that if you want to get some more information, you can use your token device and provided by the Secretariat to collect some key documents that are going to be available at the touch point at the back. In closing, I want to say to you that there is a lot of opportunities for building on the work that is being done by the NAP Global Network, and I want to encourage you to get involved. There are going to be it's going to be, I see it results in benefits to so many different countries that are in the process or that are looking to develop a NAP. So join me in showing your appreciation for the panel, and Haley, John, Laureta, Martina for their contributions. Thank you very much and have a good evening. And you can join us for refreshments and also further discussions at the back.
Refreshments are just straight out and then to the right, right? Like 10 meters, 15 meters?
50.
50, oh, 50, sorry.